I've asked Mrs. Van Zwanenberg just to tell us whatever she chooses to, a little bit of her escape, and then we can go from there and ask her questions. I purposely kept the letter back that she sent to us, so we would have fresh questions to ask her. And then I will give you a copy of the letter probably in a couple days. So I'll turn it over to you, however you feel comfortable with what you say or how you say it, and then we'll just maybe butt in with questions after that.
Thank you. This is quite an experience for me. I've never done it before, and I hope that I can say some things that are interesting to you, but I'll do the best I can. I was born and raised in Belgium, in Antwerp, of Dutch parents. And Belgium is a bilingual country. And nowadays, if you lived there, it would be more political, and they would ask you, are you of Flemish descent, which is a dialect of Dutch, or are you of French descent? And then you would have to be taught in the language that is your background. But when I was a child, I went to school in 1905. It was up to the parents. And because we spoke Dutch at home, my parents thought that it would be interesting if I took a French education. And so when I was 6 years old, I was bilingual. And we always went to Holland on vacation. It's close by, it's like going from here to Buffalo, you know. America is big, and European countries are much and much smaller, especially Holland and Belgium. And that is, of course, one of the many reasons that we have always learned more languages. I think I was 12 years old when I spoke 4 languages, Dutch, French, German, and English. And that is nothing to brag about, but this is the way we were brought up. And it was much more necessary than here. And so we always went to Holland on vacation because all the relatives lived there. And so in 1914, when World War I broke out, we were in Holland on vacation in the summer. And we never went back to Belgium and moved to Holland and lived there until World War II. So I've lived in Holland from 14 to 40. And I was married in Holland, a Dutch husband, and my 2 children were born in Holland. So in May 10th, 1940, Holland was invaded. So that was my second World War that I went through. We saw the parachutes come down, and we knew that it was time to get out of there. We lived close to the German border. It was maybe an hour's walk. And we had heard the rumblings, and we knew that something was in the making. And so we had 4 little suitcases ready for months and months for my late husband and me and my 2 children, with our Dutch passport, money, gas mask, and a few odds and ends, so that if something happened, we could take the little suitcase and escape in a hurry. And when we saw the parachutes, and when we knew that Germany was invading Holland, we fled in a hurry. And I have to tell you that we were lucky about one thing. We had a large meat packing plant and a pharmaceutical plant. We were the first ones to make insulin in Europe. And because of that, my late husband, who did run the meat packing plant, had, I don't know the English word, but he had a paper that if ever the war broke out, he was to take care of the feeding the people from the government out to get as much as possible. And he had a safe conduct so that wherever the roads were closed and the regular people couldn't pass, he could. So when we fled from our hometown, Nijmegen, to The Hague, there were bridges where there were ferry boats, and many people couldn't make it, but because he had his sign to prove that he could go wherever he wanted to, we crossed these bridges and the ferry boats. And I think it was Friday morning when we fled from our hometown, and it was Sunday afternoon when we arrived at The Hague. And of course, that was a very, very long trip, but we had to spend the nights somewhere, and it was a horrendous trip. And we stayed at The Hague with our partner, who is no more either. And we had the good luck to know the ambassador to Uruguay a little. And so 10 Van Zwanenbergs, my family and the partner's family, fled to the ambassador's house. And for 9 weeks, the 10 of us slept on the floor in one room at the ambassador's house. And of course, we were safe. His car had a CD, which means Corps Diplomatic Corps. If I had to go to the beauty parlor, the ambassador and his chauffeur would take me, and I was safe, because if we had gone out of the house, we would have been in the same danger that other Jewish people were. But because we were under the safeguard of the ambassador, we were absolutely safe. And we considered for weeks and weeks what to do. A very important thing I have to tell you is that all the banks were closed, so you couldn't get a penny. And we were considering what to do and how to get out of the country. And the ambassador, God rest his soul, he was an angel. What he has done to 25 people, all the ambassadors of all the countries could have done. But there are so many people that are selfish and never think of you or of you, but only of themselves. So we stayed 9 weeks at the embassy. The banks were closed. There was no way for us to get money, but my late husband got money from all the insurance companies. And then he had a man come who bought us dollars on the black market. And so when we finally got out of the country, we had enough money to live for a couple of years, and we were comfortable. We have been fortunate in many respects. The ambassador went every day to the Germans to see if he could get German visas. And I will tell you something, that when we came to this country, we never told anyone because it was dangerous, but now I can tell you that there were a few decent Germans who said to the ambassador, 1 or 2 days before we left, there is a way that we will give you a visa, a German visa, to get out of the country for these people. If you have fake Uruguayan passports printed, because knowing that they are Jewish, we will not put a German visa on their Dutch passports. So the ambassador went to a printing house and had, I think, 10 passports printed as if we came from Uruguay. And the Germans did put the German visas on these passports. Of course, we never got these passports because that was a dangerous matter. But he had them in his diplomatic pouch. And he arranged on the 16th of July, 1940, so that was just 2 months after the invasion. Holland was invaded the 10th of May, and we got out of the country the 16th of July. The diplomatic train left The Hague with all the diplomatic corps from Holland and Belgium. And then you kids have heard quite a few times when they talk about all the troubles in all these countries lately, that the International Court of Justice at The Hague helps, and they all were on this train as well. And I can still see all these German officers with their Heil Hitler salute and all their medals and everything. And there we sat. I get the goosebumps when I talk about it. And we sat in that train. And it went from The Hague to Bern in Switzerland. And of course, we were there in very high society, all the diplomats of Holland and Belgium. And when we arrived in Switzerland, all the personnel of all these hotels stood there and wanted to take all these suitcases from these gentlemen. But our ambassador would never let loose with his little diplomatic pouch with all those fake passports in it. Under no circumstances. He kept them. And so, at the time that we arrived there, the middle of July, the south of Switzerland, the south of France, forgive me, was still unoccupied. We stayed a few days in Bern, and then once a week there was a bus that went from Geneva to the south of Europe, the Spanish-Portuguese border in the Pyrenees. The town was Portville. And we arrived there, and the ambassador telephoned Uruguay because he had never heard from his country. You see, the Germans didn't let the word go through. And the ambassador found out that he was to be ambassador to Uruguay and Portugal. And we had hoped to go to Uruguay with him. And that, of course, changed our plans a little. And then additional to that, I must tell you, we lived 4 months in Portugal. And everybody, all the relatives in the USA and everybody that had escaped and said, don't go to South America, come to the USA because the political situation is not so stable in South America, and still now, many times, something goes on. So we stayed 4 months in Portugal, and we applied for these 2 countries, and it was October 1940 when we got our visas. And then we had to buy transportation on the black market. There were planes, not many. That was 1940, it's 40 years ago. And the few planes that were there were always booked solid, and the Americans had preference over anybody else, which stands to reason. So it came to a point where we felt that there was not much of a chance to get a plane to go to America. And in the meantime, Portugal had taken boats from South Africa, the Portuguese colonies, Angola, and several others. My son has always said, all the people brag about having come on the Mayflower, and they think that is a big deal. He said, we came to America on a Portuguese banana boat, and we got there just as well. So he feels that all your ancestors don't have to brag, because we made it as well. We had to buy it on the black market, and it cost a fortune. But in the 3rd of December, I think, we went by boat from Portugal to the USA, and we arrived in Hoboken on the 3rd of December, 1940. God bless America. Now, there is a great deal that I can tell you, but I wonder if I shouldn't shut up and ask them to ask some questions. Mrs. McGarvey?
We have 20 minutes left. Do any of you have questions so far? And then she can continue. The thing that you emphasized in your letter was...
Huh? What is it?
What you told me in your letter was that you were able to get out before the yellow stars and the persecution that way.
Yes. I want to tell you one thing. We were lucky, but my father and my sister stayed in Holland. My sister and her husband and 2 children and a son-in-law were in hiding in a strange family's home upstairs under a false name in one room, the 5 of them, for 2 years and 9 months, and they survived. But my father didn't survive. I have lost 30 to 40 relatives, including my father, due to Hitler, many and most in the gas chamber. But about my late father, I have to tell you that he was in an old folks' home in Amsterdam. And I first thought to bring those papers and everything. But you know, kids, if there are a few of you who like it, you're welcome to come and see me in Cuba. But I thought we don't have enough time for me to bring all these papers. It's too time-consuming. But after the war, my sister gave me a little pocket agenda. And on the 25th of November, 1942, he was 84 then, he wrote, I had a visit of the police. They wanted to take me, but I turned the invitation of the gentleman down. And that same, he always carried poison with him. And he would have taken care of the situation himself before the Germans could take him to the gas chamber. The same evening, they came with a stretcher, and of course, he couldn't resist. He was probably sleeping in bed, 84 years old, and they picked him up and put him on the stretcher. And there was a building, it was an old theater, where they brought him, and that is where they loaded the people up until the building was full, and then a cattle train would go to one of the concentration camps where there was a gas chamber, whether that was Birkenau or Auschwitz or whatever the name is. There were so many of them, and then they would put them in the gas chamber. But my father had the courage at 84 years old, when he was in that theater, and they picked him up so he couldn't take the poison, you know, it was so sudden, to commit suicide and jump out of the window. And I was not told. A relative had heard it in New York, but he told me that my father had died of a heart attack. And at 84, under the circumstances that were existing, I was almost thankful. And so during these 2-3 years of the war, I never was upset about his death, because I thought, fortunately, he escaped the Germans. But when Holland was freed and the war was over, they felt that they had to tell me the circumstances under which he had died. So now I think that I will. Is that all right?
That's fine. Let me ask you another question. At this time, how were they able to know who was Jewish and who was not?
Well, they knew that of most people, and they had people forced to prove what they were. And many couldn't say that they were Catholic or Mohammedan or whatever. You see?
I'm thinking of a large number of people that people had to make contact with.
I will tell you that all told, 8 million Jews all over the world have been killed by the Germans. There are non-Jewish people that have been killed too, several million, but Hitler had them more in mind. Many Polish people have been killed. I think 3 million Polish people.
Do any of you have questions that we planned before?
I beg you, you know, I try to say as much as I can, but there is just a limited time.
Now, you knew nothing of Anne Frank until later years.
No.
But you
And
had-
I want you to know, I went back after the war 16 times, and several times I took grandchildren of mine. And I went to Holland and Belgium to show where grandma was born and where their parents were born. I showed them the house where the parents were born. I mean, it was quite a bit of history, and it was extremely interesting. And I showed them the Anne Frank house. I didn't go in. It's too much for me. Yes.
How did you settle in Cuba? Why did you decide?
What is it?
Why did you settle in Cuba?
Yeah. Well, you know, we first lived in Nyack, New York, on the Hudson. And my late husband went to New York every day and met somebody. He was awfully nervous and upset, and met some European people, was introduced to quite some Americans. And so at a certain time, there was a man whom he saw several times and who kept telling him, if you are nervous, we didn't know whether we ever would go back to Holland or not, you know. And he said, if you are nervous and you want to do something, I know something for you to do. There is a cheese plant for sale in Cuba, New York. We had, of course, never heard. We thought it was Fidel Castro in Havana. So he kept telling and telling and telling. And it came finally to the point, this is a good joke, that we did send 2 accountants or 2 lawyers to Cuba, New York, to find out what type of business it was and if it was something that was worthwhile investing your money in. And they said in New York, one thing we have to tell you, it's a good thing that you took lawyers from New York, because in that part of the country where that factory is, you can't trust the people. They call them the Armenians of the North. And I will tell you frankly that if I have to have a choice, I rather trust the Armenians of the North than the people in New York City. So when these lawyers came back, they said that it was a good business. Was much smaller than now, but it was worth looking into. And so my late, many of you know Cuba? Well, anyway, we stayed at the St. James Hotel, very elegant. It was so uneven that you felt as if you were seasick when you walked on the corridor upstairs. So then we once went with the children and we rented a house, we bought a Cuba cheese, and we lived for 3 weeks in the Kinney Hotel. And then we rented a furnished house, and I'm still living there. So I've never lived so long in all my life anywhere than in the USA of America, the United States. And it is by choice that I live here now, because I could go wherever I wanted it. But I feel 100% happy and at ease here. What else? Yeah.
When did you get your citizenship? Are you a citizen?
Little louder.
Are you a citizen now?
Oh yeah. We became, my late husband and I became citizens in 1945 in Belmont. And you probably, several of you, have known Judge Hopkins. He is dead now, but his son still lives in Cuba. And Judge Hopkins and his wife were our witnesses. And at that time, you could get citizenship once a year in Belmont. So Judge Hopkins and his wife went with us. And when he came back in Cuba, they question you. You know, you have to know about American history a little, which is natural, or you're not worth getting the citizenship. So Judge Hopkins said to people, if they had asked me half of what they asked the Van Zwanenbergs, I would have flunked. Of course, that's nonsense. And then I have to tell you, my son wanted to enlist at 17 when he was out of high school, but he didn't have his citizenship yet, so he couldn't enlist. So he went a year to college, didn't do a blessed thing, but had a beautiful time and enjoyed it immensely. And when he was 18, he was drafted. And he had his basic training in Florida. And one day we get a collect call from Jacksonville, of course, collect, so what else? And he says, Ma, how many citizens are there in this country? And at that time it was 150 million. And he used a dirty word that I won't repeat here. And he said, and you all are a dirty bunch of foreigners. But he had his citizenship because he was in the service. And after that, when he had his basic training in Florida, they took him and sent him to Germany, which they did to a lot of foreign-born boys because they knew more languages and they learned them more easily. And he was in the counterintelligence. I will say that he was too young for that, and it could have been dangerous because they let them do things that a boy of 18 or 19 shouldn't be doing. But He is a decent person, so it hasn't done him any harm.
May we move up 40 years and take a similar situation and ask what you think about the hostages or how you would correct that situation, since you in one sense maybe sympathize with the...
I don't know so much about the hostages, but I'm extremely pessimistic about the future. I tell you frankly, this is what I said to this dear lady in the car. If I have learned anything of my late parents, they were people of high moral standards and caliber, and they taught us so much. And my mother used to say, there never will be another war. She didn't live when World War II broke out, but World War I, and there have been wars all through the world. She said, it will always be 25 or 30 years between one world war or the second, because then the children grow up. And what your grandparents went through could happen again. And I beg you, believe what they say. There will be Nazis always and always. And there are other people that are no good, and don't trust them. It is very dangerous, and I don't feel comfortable about the future. I don't say I'm right, but you ask my opinion. I'm very scared.
Is there anything else you'd like to ask? Dale?
Yeah.
How old were your children when you came to America?
My daughter was almost 18, and my son was 13. And the funny thing is, he did high school in 3 years because he had had French and German and Latin. But he didn't speak a word of English. That was the last language that apparently they taught him. And so nobody believes that he is foreign born because he has no accent. He learned his English in America.
When did you first realize what the Nazis
Will you
were-
talk a little louder?
When did you first realize what the Nazis were going to do?
Oh, several years before the war broke out. You know, it's something that grows. And then I told Mrs. Cross, if a Jewish person was able to prove that he had so and so much non-Jewish blood in his veins, then he was free. And so I had a relative who looked over the family trees of my family's background. And there was quite some Gentile blood in the family, but not enough to save us.
Like, say if some of us wanted to come visit you at your home, like, when would be the best time? What day is?
Well, give me your ring.
She's a busy lady. You book her about a year ahead.
No, not a year. But I mean, I can't say it now. I have to have my little book with me. And just give me your ring. Mrs. McGarvey knows where I live, and she'll look it up in the telephone book. Huh?
Anything else?
I want you kids to know that it has been a wonderful experience for me and a great honor, and I hope that you get a little out of it.
Well, we've learned so much, and I still say we can always learn from a person much more than we can learn in a classroom probably for the next 10 years, so we certainly
And
thank you.
you can see why I was not able to answer you enough, because it was an entirely different picture. You see, we were fortunate to be out of it and protected by the ambassador, so we had no dealings with the Germans.
Well, they know the other side, Mrs. Vanderhorst, so I
Yeah.
think they have
Yes,
both pictures now, the number of years
sure.
covered.
It
Okay.
might be interesting to let them know about your home being occupied by the Nazis.
In Holland,
Mhm.
yeah. We had built a house in Holland in 1934. If I may say, a very beautiful house. And we only lived 6 years in it. And the Germans occupied it. And a few neighbor boys stole 2 chromium chairs out of our house. It's the most, the interior decoration was far ahead of the USA in Europe. Architecture and interior decoration. So I have those 2 chairs in my house. After the war, they sent them to us. And then you kids have asked the question, we did lose all our furniture. And after the war, the German government had to pay the people. But if you think that a big house they stole from the attic to the basement, and we got the maximum that was 11%. You know, that's nothing. But I have my 2 chairs here that the kids stole. And then another blessing, I don't know who did it, but we have 2 valuable paintings, and we had 5 valuable Oriental rugs, and they were saved because they hung in the boardroom of our pharmaceutical plant, so the Germans didn't know to whom they did belong. And I have those here in Cuba.
Okay, I think we'll quit then. Thank you. It's almost time for the bell.